Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Customer Success Unlocked webinar. Each month, our webinar series provides practical advice, new and trending topics, and real-life examples presented by industry leaders. We will give everyone a moment to settle in. I know we have a global audience on the webinar, and we'll invite you to drop a message into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. And Michael and You Mon, you can drop in where you're joining from as well and join our conversation. While we're waiting for everyone to join, I want to bring your awareness to two maturity assessments that ESG offers for the market space. The first is our CS Operations Maturity Assessment. That assessment measures 60 data points across 15 different categories. It's 100% free. It's available on the esgsuccess.com website. It takes about 10 minutes to complete, and you'll get initial results instantly, and then a set of tailored results in a full report that we'll follow up with in about a week that includes recommendations for each of those 15 capabilities. The second maturity offering is in-depth and covers all things customer success for your organization. It looks at over 200 data points across 17 different capabilities there. I see we have most of our attendees in place, so I'll go ahead and kick us off here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Melissa Langworthy. I'm a customer success architect here at ESG. I'd like to welcome you to our Customer Success Unlocked webinar titled Retaining and Growing Customers in the Landscape of the 2024 World. I'll be serving as your host alongside my co-moderator, ESG's Michael Harnum. Before I introduce today's panel, just a few housekeeping items. First, our chat today will be fireside chat style, and you'll not see slides on your screen, but I promise you're not missing anything. Your Zoom is working just fine if you can see the three of us. Second, we're recording the session, and the link to that recording will be made available to everyone within 24 hours. And lastly, we encourage you to submit your questions for our panel at any time. You can do that in the Q&A portion of Zoom at the bottom of your screen. I love it when our attendees have questions, and as a host, I get to skip my prepared questions and answer your questions because sometimes they're even better than I would have thought of in advance, or they follow the conversation. So go ahead and drop those questions in the Q&A. All right, let's get to it. I want to welcome our wonderful panel today. First, I want to welcome You Mon Tsang, CEO of ChurnZero, back to Customer Success Unlocked. Welcome, You Mon.
Thanks for having me, Melissa.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. And then we have ESG's very own CEO, Michael Harnum. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Mel. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, let's get to it. So our topic today stems from the position that many customer success leaders find themselves in today, and that's back on their heels, playing defense, and continuing to educate peers, executives, and board members of the continued value that customer success brings to an organization in terms of sustained revenue, new revenue, and expanding the customer experience. You Mon, our first question is to you. As CEO of a CS platform, I'm sure you have heard several objections against customer success and whether it can live on as a viable business function. How do you confront and address these objections?
Yeah, that's a big first question, Mel. So maybe I'll start by just expanding my background a little bit. So I'm the founder and CEO of ChurnZero. So we work with a lot of CS teams. Thousands of them, right? And so I've heard a lot of stories. And by the way, for anyone who's on the call, if you ever sort of need a resource on CS, I'm a resource. I've also been an entrepreneur, software entrepreneur for over close to 30 years now. So this is my fourth company. And so I've seen sort of the machinations, ups and downs, of downturns. So I guess I've been here before. And so to your question specifically, I think I have sort of 3 points, and Michael, sort of feel free to just, chime in here. I think the first point is like it should have been expected, right? That there is pushback on CS. We should just, Like if we didn't expect it, we would just, we just haven't learned history. In many ways, right, this is CS's first downturn, right? It's our very first downturn. CS is a relatively new department. COVID was a little weird time, right? But that actually was not a sustained downturn. This is our first sustained downturn. And the last time there was a sustained downturn, CS just wasn't a thing yet, right? There was pockets of there here and there being germinated, but it became a real department in B2B businesses after the last sustained downturn. So when you are the youngest department in an organization, you're probably actually all the leaders are probably a little bit less tenured. All your best practices are probably a little less honed. When a downturn comes, it should make sense, right? That you could feel vulnerable and even be vulnerable, right? So that's one. You kind of should expect this sort of feeling and these objections against customer success. And everyone should say, hey, look, last in, first out, right? So one, we kind of should expect it. I think so. That's one. Two, I think it's also overblown. I think people talk about it all the time. I think it's also overblown. In the end, right? The folks who probably are taking hits on their CS departments in a big way, it's probably more of a function of their company being in trouble rather than their CS being in trouble, right? So at those exact same departments, what's happening to their marketing departments, what's happening to their sales departments, sort of put that into the context. Now, I think there's a real good reason why I think it's overblown. And there has been a change over the last 15 years as we all moved over to subscription businesses. And that's become really sort of recurring revenue subscription businesses now the number one business model. Revenue retention is now a top 2 metric in an organization, right? I think number 1 is still growth, right? But number 2 is revenue retention, whether it's GRR or NRR. If you're a top 2, like if that is true and stays true, and I believe that is the case, right? If you're the CS person, if you're in charge of revenue retention, I mean, it's hard for you to be shaken free, right? It's hard for you to see if it's viable, right? Right? If revenue retention is a top 2 metric, you are absolutely viable. This brings me to my last point, right? So first point should have been expected. 2 is probably overblown. 3, you better learn from this, right? Like let's all learn from it. Harden your operations. And I think most importantly, own, demand, expand on your revenue obligations, right? Own the revenue. If you're a CS person, you don't own renewals, you're really behind. If you're a CS leader and you don't own expansion, ask for it. If you're a CS leader and you don't own cross-sell, well, think about it. That may not be the best thing to do, but you should think about that. So learn from it. So those are my 3 points. Michael, any thoughts on sort of what I said there?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, You Mon. I mean, I think about these conversations about the viability of organizations in terms of what do we know to be true and how should we live in relation to that truth. And quick side note, I mean, there's a book written by Richard Nixon's hatchet man, Chuck Colson, called How Now Shall We Live? And he was a really bad dude, did Nixon's dirty work, went to jail, had a spiritual reawakening, and said, if this is all true, how now am I going to live my life in relationship to that truth? And if we apply that same principle to the customer success world, or really the business world, forget about customer success and the labels and the org structure for a minute. What do we now know to be true in the business world? And how should we live in relation to that? What we know to be true is that it's a lot harder these days to win new business. A lot harder to win new logos. 30% of software sales reps make their quota on a quarterly basis. That means 70% don't. Right? That means companies are missing their sales bookings targets, which downstream means they're going to miss their revenue targets and their profit target. So there's all sorts of things that are challenging winning new business in the marketplace. I mentioned one reason why, there's a variety of reasons why. So if that's the case, then you turn your attention towards, I want to keep my existing customers and I want to maintain and grow that base. These are all simple concepts that we all know and understand. And so where How Now Shall I Live comes in is, okay, if our focus and our priority and the way that we're going to grow this company is to maintain our customer base and grow it strategically, what are the things we have to do? How now shall we live inside that customer base to accomplish that? I don't care if you call it customer success or account management or yippee-ki-yay. There's a few things that you have to do to be successful there. And so I like to drive these conversations when I'm meeting with CXOs or customer success leaders is what is that work that needs to be done inside of your company in relation to your customers to accomplish that truth? And let's figure out a plan to go do that. You can do it. We can help you. We can help you build a strategy, however you slice it. But what you can't do is just pretend that those issues aren't there and decide you're not going to go do it, because that's a fool's errand, and we know where that's going to lead.
Are you worried about sort of the context of CS? Are you worried about CS as a viable, business department in our ecosystem?
Uh, I wholesale, no, I'm not. I think in certain industries and or in certain companies, depending on the makeup of the leadership of that organization, there could be certain hotspots that are vulnerable. But overall, I think the direction that business is moving is more towards maintaining and growing existing customer relationships. And I think customer success is going to need to play a major role in that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I like to sort of look at history, and I spent a lot of time in the marketing world and sort of when the CMO was growing up. And the CMO had that problem for a long time, right? It's like every CMO was fired every 18 months, right? Now it's 24, it's a little better, right? But anytime there was a downturn, the marketing team was always completely decimated. What's the role? And here we are, right? And marketing is continues to be a healthy player. Kind of wags, but their tail gets wagged a lot, right? Their budget always gets cut and expanded during good times, cut during bad times. But they're here, right? And they play a major role. So just to put a nail in it, Mal, right? I think you can use. Well, I like to use that sort of as a learning for will CS survive or marketing survive? I think CS will more than survive as well.
I think it's important to step in and look at root causes of a lot of the horror stories that are on the internet now of CS organizations being absolved within the internal system, and look and see where that stems from. One example I know of is it stemmed from not really having well defined what a CSM is, what their job responsibilities were, what the compensation package was for those individuals. And as they were looking to grow and expand, not having that route defined and growing from that so that you can hire the right person to do what a core responsibility is was a shortcoming. So in light of not having that defined, they had the path, the fork in the road. Do we define the customer success role for our individuals, or do we lean back and stick to what an AM is that we know we have that defined and use that instead? So rather than developing, falling back on heels, doing what's comfortable and not really adopting the true step of change there. So from that, You Mon, you mentioned revenue and growth being key metrics. Michael, you mentioned go to market as being a strategy that customer success could lean into, or that the organization should lean into, as far as getting the org ready to meet the needs of the business. So given those ideas, do either of you have strong inklings? Is customer success ready to step up, become a true peer, and play a more vital role in the go-to-market strategy? And if so, what is that role? What's missing right now?
So, Michael, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
I think the key, we're going to hit on a bunch of themes that I think are pretty prevalent in our marketplace and that we're all familiar with. To me, the biggest obstacle towards more effective go-to-market strategies involving customer success is simply the relationship with sales and the expectation of sales and how tightly that relationship is formed is one thing. And related to that is just the broad understanding and acceptance of customer success as a necessary business motion across organizational towers inside of a company, right? And so if it's thought of as a business function that does a thing over here, then you're probably not going to have much, go-to-market success. But getting to me, the most effective customer success leaders are those that are aligned with their peers in sales and are involved in the pre-sales process in a meaningful way, not just you're joining a call and you get 5 minutes to share what customer success is, but you're participating in proposal creation and proposal delivery, and you're answering questions, and you're forming relationships with prospects, prior to purchase. But that takes a lot of trust in an organization, and I think that's one of the things that I've seen in less efficient customer success organizations, that there is an absence of trust across leaders of different disciplines in that organization. And that's an opportunity to break down some barriers for customer success leaders.
Yeah, I think customer success they have a lot of connections to the other CXOs, probably more than average. Maybe the CFO has the most. I would say use it. But one of the things that at ChurnZero we use as a guiding post for our own roadmap discussion and the way we think about making investments in our own company, we're making an assumption that this chief customer officer, the CCO, is going to be the most important go-to-market leader in a company. It's going to be the most important go-to-market leader in a company. And the reasons are clear, right? Like if a company gets big enough, guess who owns most of the revenue in that company, right? Who's responsible for that the revenue? That's the CCO, right? It is the CCO that, by the way, should know your most important asset the best, which is the customer. And so if you're a CCO or VP of CS, you own it, you have a bully stick and you ought to use it and you should command it and you should feel confident about it. I think probably what we're missing, maybe to your point, Mel, is that, I'm going to go back to this as sort of a developing department, and so that maybe we don't have the history of success, the history of sort of knowing best practices, the history of metrics to, for us to feel really confident about. But I think that needs to change, right? So if there's the one thing that needs to change is like, I own the customer, right? I understand where they're failing and where they're succeeding, right? I can help product, make the product better. I can help sales find the ICP. I can help marketing with the messaging that really, where the successes are. I mean, that is a bully stick that you should feel, and most of the CCOs here are not bullies, right? But you might as well act like one because you're, because you're probably not doing it enough. So, if you don't accept that premise, right, you won't be a credible CCO. Because I say in 5 years, right, if I'm the CEO of a company, the most important person I hire will be the CCO, because that person is going to have the most responsibility with the most complex workflows, the most complex metrics and analytics, right? And so that person better be the best. So everyone who's on this call, you're on the road to being the best CXO in the in your company, and you better start behaving that way, right? Because that's going to be expected from you.
So along those lines, there's trends now. I love where you're going with the CCO being in the future the key exec, the CXO that manages customer success. But there's a trend now where CROs are very much having a larger role in managing and dictating what happens with customer success and where the direction of the org goes for an organization. So for a budget conscious CRO that's looking to cut costs, what advice and recommendations would either of you offer to them so that they maintain the CS business function during the challenging times where we're at now, where everything's under scrutiny.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have some thoughts. I mean, I think, let's not make the assumption that the CRO is all sales, right? Some CROs come from CS. Not many, but more and more will, right? So I'm going to maybe be specific is that there's a budget conscious CRO looking to cut costs, and that CRO came from sales, right? And so therefore is unfamiliar with CS. So instead of just like, kind of whacking away at costs, what should they do? Um, I think the most important thing for CXOs who are new to a department is to understand the benchmarks, right? And understand the benchmarks against peers. There are a lot of reports out there that you can use to say, hey, this is generally like in best practices, you know, and by the way, they use it for the sales side, right? Like what quota should I be giving my AEs, right? What quota should I be giving my SDRs? What's their attainment rate? Well, those similar benchmarks all exist for CS, right? What's their book of business size? What's the right GRR, NRR goals for them? So benchmark so that you just don't, so that you can be aggressive about it if you need to cut costs, but you just can't be like weird. You just can't be arbitrary about it, right? So benchmarking for sure. The other thing I ask people to do is look at structural issues. So this is a more tactical, right? I find that a lot of folks have a lot of what I call structure on their team. So a lot of teams with a lot of like managers and maybe sort of admins in the wrong place and operations people in the wrong place, and so therefore it's structural. So when you cut back on individual contributors, do you also have the right level of managers, right? So that's oftentimes where I see people being a little fat. And then like just do the math. I think the math, like just do the math. If you're paying a CSM, I'm just make the math easy, 100K to manage a book of $2 million. That's a 5%, right? You're paying them 5% of that book. If that CSM were not there, would you lose 5% more in NRR? Probably, right? Just do the math, right, before you start cutting things. So I would say benchmark, right? Look at structural issues, and then do the math, right? So that you actually are cutting costs in all the right places.
You mentioned the ratio of the teams being too fat with leadership. Is there a recommended ratio that you feel is best for CS?
That's a hard question. Like there is there are what generally is known is that a single person can manage seven people underneath them that do different things, right? So so let's just say Michael and I, we run companies. We have a marketing person, a salesperson. They all do different things. We can each handle seven. If they're all doing the same thing, right? They're just doing the exact same thing. You can handle more, right? You can handle 10, 12. But I think a lot of that has to do with how tenured each of the folks are. They're all beginners, right? You can do fewer. If they're all super tenured, you can have more. But it's likely more than seven, probably, maybe around 10, and, in that range.
Yeah, and I think building off the math comment that You Mon made in terms of understanding the organization, the moving parts, I find there are several of our customers that come to mind who have a specific weakness in the area of understanding, there's a maximum number of calories you can spend with, limited resources in a customer success organization. How are those calories being spent? Are they being spent in a way that is most impactful and most strategic and most efficient? And so a couple examples of things that can fall down with that. One is we'll have a very experienced, very technical, very expensive CSM performing very administrative tasks on behalf of a customer, right? And so there's things like that you got to get that off the plate and either not do them, have a less expensive resource to automate it. There's a million different ways to do that. But if you want that expensive resource working with your largest customers, which probably makes strategic sense, you have to align the activities to be consistent with that level of experience to maximize the value that the customer is getting out of that. And then taking that same concept and just working it down your entire stack. Where are you spending your time and energy, towards what end, against what segments of your customer? Do you have your customers properly in the right segments and tiers so that you can have a tiered strategy and apply your most expensive resources at the top, maybe some mid-level resource in the middle, and then you've got some digital play on your long tail. Have you thought about your business just at those basic building block levels? I see a lot of companies that are still in the mode of scramble, right? We have a lot of escalations. We don't have time to think about doing anything strategic. And that's where this is all going to fall down, because your calories aren't being spent in an efficient way. And if the day ever comes where you've got to justify the expense of your organization, that math is going to be really hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Michael. I mean, it's oftentimes when you have to cut costs where you relook, hard at all the things you're doing, and you're like, oh, right, that's a mess. Like the engine is not running well, right? You need a better fuel efficiency. Guess what? You need to tune the engine. So, I think that's a something you have to look at.
You both mentioned in responses, the continued need to have revenue as part of customer success remit. In the maturity assessment practice that ESG has, in a given week, we'll see a dozen different flavors of customer successes business practices, where they each have a different look and feel depending on what that company is doing and what the industry calls for. So for example, some have a very narrowly defined view and only focus on onboarding and adoption activities. And there might not be any revenue metrics that the team is responsible for. And another example, they might have a broader remit and include support services, retention, expansion, and driving customer advocacy. And there still might be a third group that solely focus on revenue retention, expansion, upsell, and those ROI metrics. With so many different flavors of customer success out there in the SaaS world, do either of you think that there's a sweet spot?
This is an indirect answer to that question, Mel, and I'll bring it down more directly. But to me, the sweet spot is the company that systemically understands the need to proactively communicate with their customers in an informed way. And to me, that's the definition of customer success: is you're communicating proactively and in an informed way with your customers. And if that attitude, that need, that requirement permeates the organization, I don't care what industry you're in, what experience you have, what growth you're expecting, it's going to seep into every practice that you have, and your customer success practice with a little bit of organization is going to succeed. I mean, from there, I think more specifically, there will be differences in industries, differences in the stickiness of the product, right? If it's super sticky and not going anywhere, you're probably going to focus a little bit more on onboarding and implementation to get them stood up, because then it's gonna roll a little bit on their own. If its churn is a little bit higher, and it's difficult to keep those customers, you're probably going to have a longer term plan. The one thing that I see a lot of companies missing that I would just make sure I contemplate is that you have alignment between your intended tasks and strategies that you're going to have your CSMs perform and the skill set of those CSMs. I see a lot of companies retrofitting employees from other areas and just retitling them as CSMs and saying, now you're going to go do this. And those people don't have the skills to go do that. And it fails, 100% of the time. It fails. And so just make sure that there's that alignment. And if you're stuck with a group of people that doesn't have the skill set that you need, well, then you need to adjust your strategy accordingly to set that team up for success.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of flavors of CS. There are a lot of flavors. Yeah. And
It's the Baskin Robbins of organizations. What, like 21 flavors? Is that how many?
21 flavors. Yes, exactly. I've come to accept it. Okay. And here's why, right? Unlike sales and marketing, your go-to-market partners. I mean, there's only so many ways to market to a B2B company, right? There's only so many ways to do sales, right? You know, maybe you have an enterprise, PLG motion, inbound, outbound. There's only so many ways. Once an account is closed one and it comes into customer success, there are so many ways to, you know, depending on your service or your product to service them. You could have a technical product with a big implementation, right? You may have a simple product, the set it and forget it product, right? You may have thousands of users. You may have one user, right? You may have a land and expand. You may have multi-year journeys or multi-day journeys. So just by nature of, you know, like the number of product types and service types there are in the world, right? Think about all of those and how they work sort of dictates that CS is actually, you know, can have multiple flavors. So I think it's okay, right, that when you talk to your peers, in fact, one of the things we do at our conferences, right, is like we actually ask people to raise their hand and say, hey, you know, who's the mid-market, who's SMB, who's enterprise, and everyone, you know, so you can find each other. Oh, who's in vertical SaaS versus horizontal SaaS? Who's in ed tech versus, you know, fintech, right? So people can find each other. So I would say find each other because, you know, there's so many different flavors. But your question, Mel, is that is there a sweet spot? I think there's a core spot, and I think every CS team should own renewal. Just own renewal. Like get that. If you don't get that, you're just always going to be vulnerable. So, you know, no matter if you are a simple product, set a forget it product, or a multi-year enterprise product, you know, just try to own the renewal first. That's, I think, core in the sweet spot.
By own renewal, do you mean that the individual contributor, the CSM, is managing the contract and going through all those internal admin processes of quoting? Or is that okay if they own it, but there's another individual that manages and has that task as their primary contribution? I want to make sure we're
Yeah, it's a good
clear on what we
question.
mean by own renewal.
Owning, I mean by that, the CS team, the CSMs are responsible. They're the ones that are responsible for that renewal happening, right? And happening meaning like someone says yes to renewal. Like it could be once that yes is done, like there's another team that does the operational part of getting the signatures, right? That often is the case. But just steering the ship into the harbor, right? That's ought to be CS, right? And like there's, and by the way, it's all about teamwork, right? Products involved, right? Sales has to, right, you know, bring in the right ICP. But at the end of the day, who's comp for revenue retention? It has to be CS. Like who owns that metric? It has to be CS.
Excellent. Okay, let's switch topics a bit. I think we would be not doing our justice to our audience if we weren't talking about and shifting the conversation to include a business technology as part of our discussion. So planning for the future, if we're talking about CS being the newest organization in the organization, AI is the newest technology that's entering into the tool stack. When planning for the future of a company, what role does AI play?
I
Want to start
think,
that, Michael?
yeah, at the company level, I think, first of all, my own personal preference is AI is going to have a much more prominent impact in the business world than in the personal world. I think that there's some interesting and glamorous kind of consumer applications out there that catch your eye, but I think that stuff's going to be dwarfed by tying together the mountains of data that exist in the business world in a meaningful way is going to overcome that pretty significantly. So that's kind of my going in vantage point. And then when I think about how that might apply to customer success, we do this exercise, and I've done it a few times, where you sit with a CSM for a day or a few hours, half day, whatever, and you watch them work. And you ask a couple questions. And a real specific example is you watch them prepare for a call with a customer or you watch them prepare for a quarterly business review or some type of thing that's coming up. In 100% of the cases I've been involved with, it's a sausage factory. It's very inefficient. I'm grabbing things from here. This data is incomplete. I have to make assumptions. And it's taking hours and hours and hours and hours just to get a view on that one customer that I can drive some conclusions, take some action, and formulate an agenda for whatever communication with that customer I'm having. And so I'm envisioning a world where, and we all talk about this holistic 360 view of the customer, and wouldn't that be great? And I know there are tools out there that are capable of that, but it winds up being an exercise of, can I tie together all the disparate sources of information to get that view to take that action? I mean, one really simple example is a lot of companies have a learning management system and a CRM and or a CS tool. Well, they're often almost never linked, right? And so I would argue that part of the health of a customer is how confident and independent are they on your platform? One indicator of that would be the training that they consumed. And are they earning certifications and are they on a training path? Right. But if that is existing in a system way over here, and I can't see it and don't have access to it, or I have to go separately log in, pull that information manually, it's just going to bog down and make my view of that customer either less efficient or less complete because I'm just not going to go through that hassle. So to me, I really like the promise of AI for customer success as an organization and for CSMs in particular to say, I'm going to pull together everything we know about this customer inside of our company. And I'm going to, number one, present a consolidated view of that data. But the real value of AI is in its ability to learn, ingest data, learn, so that it increases its output. And so as that output comes out, you could have a recommendation that is refined over time as that cycle repeats, where in comes data about the customer, out goes a summary recommendation, and you could even train it to say, I'm on that call, I'll call with the customer for 30 minutes 2 weeks from now. Give me a suggested agenda and a suggested objective for that call. And if you get that machinery moving efficiently, think about from a scaling perspective how many accounts a CSM could manage efficiently if that information was available at their fingertips.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, maybe I'll start with the CS and I'll go up to the company. By the way, I think Michael's points are good ones. What role does AI play? AI plays a role in everything, absolutely everything. I think AI changes everything. I mean, Michael's spelled it out well. Think about what your CSMs do, summarizing those, tracking down answers, recommending strategies, updating systems, ideating, assessing risks and opportunities, all those things. 80% of the things that a CSM does during a day can be helped, not be, I don't think they can be replaced by AI, could be helped by AI, can be assisted by AI. So, CSMs are ripe for that. The way I would have you all think about it is that, this is what I'm assuming is going to happen in the next 18 to 36 months. Is that I'm talking to the CS leaders on this call. Your board or your CEO is going to ask you to be 30 to 50% more efficient in the next 18 to 36 months. Because they heard that you can, right? Or that in fact, maybe two competitors are doing it and they're kind of on their way there, right? So you're going to be asked for this 30 to 50% more efficiency. And I think the way you can measure that is what Michael said is what's the book of business per CSM? Like if it's $1 million, like just to make the math easy, let's just say each of your CSM manages on average $1 million, of business. Well, 30 to 50% would be now they have to manage somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5, right? And how are you going to do that? And if if it's a sausage factory today, it's got to be better tomorrow, and AI is going to help. So, the way we think about it and the way we build it into our product ChurnZero is that we think about all the assistance that we can bring to bear on a CSM, right? Whether it's a research assistant or a meeting assistant, or an analyst assistant, like in your workflow, all the things you have to do, that are either interesting, like college, like we actually think like this person just graduated from college and they're here to help you. It happens to be AI. What can that person do, right? This is all your assistance at the right time. I think you really have to think about how it plays. At the highest level in the company, this is not just for CS, right? This is for sales, it's for marketing, it's for development. And by the way, unlike you, Michael, I think it also has a huge impact on consumers. Like I use AI 5 times a day, actually 10 times a day, probably. Most of it for personal use, right? Some of it for business, actually a lot for business, but mostly for personal use. I think it's changing everything.
There was a question along those lines that fits in here, and I think we've addressed it, but I want to make sure David gets his question acknowledged, about our best guess as the percent reduction in CS-related FTE per revenue. You mentioned that it could be a 30 to 50% more efficiency
Efficiency, right? Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
role, right? So taking on, if you're at, a 1-to-3 ratio, that would mean like moving to like a 1-to-4 or a 1-to-6 in those regards, right? Of being able to, or I guess 1-to-6 would be doubling, 100%
Yeah.
more efficient. Anecdotally, I know we have customers who have reported to us, our clients that we work with, that they've seen a 60% efficiency in adding the technology internally, AI-like tools to manage the team performance, where they could go from a 1-to-3 to 1-to-5 ratio. And those are significant impacts to an organization when you're thinking about reducing cost to serve and having an impact on what the company is spending on an FTE.
I mean, I think, maybe to answer David's question, if we're expecting a 30 to 50% increase in productivity, then the decrease in cost should probably be about 25 to a third, right? Per CSM. So, it's just sort of, the opposite of that. And by the way, if that seems daunting, right? 30 to 50% increase in, productivity, I would say it shouldn't be, because if you think about processes, right? Let's just say, your organization, your CSMs were a mess, right? You had 5 of them. They were kind of all doing their own things. There was all in spreadsheets. There was no playbook. There was no reporting. It's a mess, right? Just putting together, using some technology, to put them on the same page, automating a few things would bring just like you're probably doubling their productivity all of a sudden, right? So technology in that case, where it's just really operational excellence, you can expect, a 2x improvement in, efficiency. Why not adding, AI, which is a really different thing, but you can see it being effective. Why not add 30, 50%? It does seem plausible when you look at the impact of other types of tech.
I'm excited for a day when AI can have a predictive health score for me. It can look at all of my user metrics. It can look at all of the activities that my CSM team is performing. It can put it in, it can mix it up, it can pull it out and let me see insights into my customers and cohorts of customers that I'm not seeing here today, and telling me where I need to be predictive, maybe even getting to a point where it's a bit on the creepy side of things and it's telling me, pick them up and call them now because they did this other activity in your organization, and customers that did that other activity had a at-risk event, right? Maybe it's they've reached out to, things that we can tangibly understand now. They contacted at billing, or they contacted at contracts at the organization, and that's, those are flags and triggers that can be set up now, but maybe there's a combination of items that we're not even aware of that show us the risky behaviors our customers are doing.
I think AI can definitely help on that, Mel. The one thing I would absolutely say about that is that you can get a good health score today, even without AI. But what's most important is that you actually have good data coming in
Yes.
together, scrubbed, right? And AI may help on that a little bit, but if you have bad data, you're just putting AI on bad data, right? And then basically it's going to just tell you bad stuff. AI doesn't know new things. AI just consolidates the things you do know, right? Like it does it well, it does it fast, it does it, tirelessly. So you think of just, I mean, really do think about that. If in fact your systems are a mess, putting AI on top of a messy system is going to get you messy answers. In fact, bad answers. In fact, horrible answers told to you confidently by AI, right? And so that's all like a big risk. So if you have the ability to do a good health score today, that's because you have your data, uh, you know, all together well. And if you apply AI on top of that, it's just going to be that much better. If your data is horrible today and you apply AI on top of it, you're not going to get a good health score. You need to get your data, get that done, make sure everything looks good, and then you start applying all these things on top of it, right? Don't skip that step.
I think I'll take Phil's question that came in through our Q&A. Shouldn't efficiency count as a better GRR, NRR instead of just cutting costs? Are there specific things that Michael or You Mon are seeing that move the needle more strongly, specifically AI tools, new features and product best practices that push off the low value toil?
You want to take that, Mike? I'm just going to read
Yeah,
it.
I think to build on the one comment that I made that Phil references, to me it's getting super surgical. And so I would approach this from a, what are the best practices and processes that we've seen in our customer base, Phil, that others could apply. And to me, it's, a lot of companies are focused on a macro strategy of here's what we want to get done, and here's what we want the outcome to be, and here are the tools we have in between. Where a lot of companies fall down is taking it down to the next level or two and being super surgical in the approach and the strategy, the roles, the tasks, the playbooks by different customer type. And depending on the business, that customer type could be a segment, right? It could be a vertical cluster of customers that have a similar need. And designing a plan that is going to meet the needs of those customers and contemplate the differences of that segment or that group if it's not a segment size, um, and making sure that you've got the right skill set and the right tools per individual to meet those needs. And that sounds super simple, I realize, but every time we've gone through an exercise that with every single customer, some of the mapping just proves to be completely illogical and ultimately very inefficient. You've got the wrong set of people doing the wrong things with the wrong customer. One classic example, one of our larger customers on the East Coast, they've got a group of CSMs who came out of customer support and aren't salespeople and aren't comfortable selling or carrying a quota. And they went ahead and made them responsible for renewals and selling and upsells, and it failed miserably. And so in that scenario, understanding the needs of your customers and matching that up with the skill set of your employees became super critical and a step that they missed and paid the price for.
That's a good answer. Phil, I'm just reading your question about efficiency. Like, is better GRR better efficiency than cutting costs? It is like yeah, I would like if you were asking me as a CEO, I want better revenue retention, and I'll pay more for revenue retention. So it is a trade-off, right? If you can say, look, oh, if I guess this is really the conversation, right? I have CSM number one, they own a book of business of $2 million, right? They can deliver, decent GRR. But if they own $1.5 million, they can do amazing GRR. Well, guess what? You just do the math and you can choose what you want to do, right? So you can definitely use revenue retention in the formula to decide like how effective the dollars are being. So, those of you, uh, uh, I think one of the things, back to sort of the future of the CCO, there's a lot of metrics in as a CSM, right? Like you have revenue retention. By the way, everyone measures it a little bit differently too, which is bizarre, right? Because there's no gap measure for revenue retention, so you're dealing with that nonsense. You have NPS, you have CSAT, you have books of business, you have just so many metrics you have to deal with. Um, you know, get comfortable with that. If you're not good with analytics, you really start investing in yourself for that. Partner with the CFO, right? Partner with if you have an FP&A group, right, a financial planning group, an analysis group, partner with them, because you have to get really, really good at this, right? So questions like what was just asked, right? You can like feel good about tackling. Yeah.
All right, so for our audience paying attention, if you've been following the structure, we started by our webinar by looking back at where CS was that brought us to the topic of conversation. We spent the middle time talking about where we're at now in the face of technology, business practices, and the state of customer success. So the last prepared question I have looks a bit forward. So Michael, You Mon, you're both CEOs. Your focus areas are not the same as anyone else's in your respective companies because you're looking across all things. You spend much of your time using data, historical trends, and what you might call CEO intuition to plan for the future. So, is there a particular roadmap objective that exists today because of data, historical trends, or that CEO intuition that you anticipate will have the biggest impact on 2025?
Yeah, for me, there's two, and then there's one that's kind of creeping up. Uh, Talked about AI, that's one. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. That is absolutely on the roadmap. Um, I think the other one is really operational excellence, and especially in 2024 and 2020, with the downturn, like that's what we all like. We move from growth to excellence, right? A culture of growth to a culture of sort of efficiency and of operational excellence. I think that's super important. And then a third thing, which I think has happened already, but I've decided will never unhappen, is especially in our industry and probably for CS. And we just did a survey called CSM Confidential. 71% of CSMs are working remotely. Okay. And so that is just done, right? So workforce management remotely with CSMs is something else I think we all just have to grapple with. And, we all kind of hybrided for a long time. We all, I think we just like, it is what it is, right? It's not changing, data, historical trends. So you got to manage that. So for me, like these are three really different things, right? AI is really different from operational excellence, different from remote work. But these are things that I see not only in my world, but also the CS world that I think we all have to grapple with.
Yeah, makes sense. I think at ESG, we each year try to boil down our strategic plan into a word or a couple words so that we have a theme for the year that we can rally around that contemplates the current market conditions and layers in our strategy and our thinking. And for this year, that theme it's two words: prove it. And so prove it permeates everything that we do and the way we think about the business, and it has tentacles into all the elements of the organization. And what we mean by prove it is, there's been a transition in the last few years in the customer success marketplace from a few years ago. We would be hired to do work for customers because that work made sense. It just made sense to go do. Of course, we want a voice of the customer. Of course, we want a journey map. Of course, we want whatever work we're doing for that customer. It just made sense to do, and that was good enough, right? That's not good enough anymore, right? And now every dollar that a company spends needs to be associated with an expected return on investment, and we document that now in our pre-sales proposals. If you were to hire us for this work, you will get the following financial benefit. That is a sea change in terms of how we think about the business. and the value that we're able to deliver to our customers. So to us, the market is demanding prove it. We've made that our mantra, and we're in the process of executing against it.
I like that.
Excellent. Thank you both. So my final question, and it's the same question that we ask every guest who attends our webinar, and it's for a book recommendation. So is there a book that you would recommend to the audience? It could be, on topic. It could be something else that's just top of mind that you find intriguing for the time that we're in. You Mon, do you have a book to recommend?
Yeah, you asked for a book, which that sort of helped me grow and become more adaptable. This was a book I read a few maybe like 15 years ago. It was Moneyball by Michael Lewis. If you haven't read that, read it. Well, I'm also a baseball fan, so it's kind of business and baseball. And Michael Lewis is just an amazing, amazing writer. So it's super entertaining. So even if you don't like baseball, read it. It's really basically about how a team, baseball team with a very low budget competes against teams with very high budgets, right? So, it was the Oakland A's, which had zero money, against the New York Yankees that had all the money in the world. And they really had to change their thinking and how they would compete, right? And Moneyball, just showed how this one team changed the way they thought about things and changed the industry of baseball, through, in this case, analytics. So fascinating book, well worth reading even today. Michael Lewis is a great writer.
Excellent. There might be a bit of the future topics you talked about, maybe a little bit of operational excellence, maybe a little workforce management.
It's the beginning. It was the beginning of analytics, right? And I thought it was a book that sort of squarely showed, people who were sort of skeptical of the eggheads, right? What it could mean to change industries, right? And we're here now. Like, no one questions the eggheads anymore. But it's always good to see where it all got started.
And that's the standard now. Everybody in baseball is doing that.
Everyone in baseball is doing
differently.
it.
They're thinking
Yes.
about pitch counts differently. They're thinking about all of the numbers differently. The book changed
Basketball, football,
Yes.
soccer, yes, it's all, yeah.
All right, Harnum, I'll pass that to you. Is there a book recommendation for the audience?
Yeah, so you might have heard me say this on a prior webinar. I don't, oddly, I don't read business books. I just find them prescriptive and boring. But what I do is I read books that aren't specifically about business, and then in my own mind, try to translate them into their business relevance. And so a book that I've been fascinated with recently is one called The Meaning of Truth by Nicole Sachs, Sachs. And it is all about the connection between the mind and the body in relation to chronic pain. And her assertion is that chronic pain is an epidemic of fear and emotion, and that the connection between those two is very, very strong. And if someone were to recommend this book to me, I would think you're a hippie gypsy. Had I not experienced this for myself, I would never believe it. I also think that there's relevance to customer success in that, I want to make sure that in our industry that an epidemic of fear doesn't spread, right? Because there's a lot of reason to be defensive and concerned. And I think anytime there's turmoil in a market, human beings tend to get selfish and try and protect their organization, protect their team, protect their income, protect their fill in the blank there. And our success starts with that look in the mirror that we have in the morning, right? And if you don't believe with every fiber of your being, because it's going to take that, it's going to take all of you to believe in what you're doing, and that what you're doing is right for your company, what you're doing is right for your customers and the growth and the future of your company, and that you deserve and demand a seat at that table and a voice in that strategy. That needs to be 100% aligned with you and how you think and how you believe. If you don't fully buy in and aren't completely on board with that, it's going to be evident in every email, in every conversation, in every meeting, right? And so you being completely bought in. And so a little self-examination of like, where is your fear? And what are you scared of? And why are you scared of that? Can be a healthy project to go through. both in your personal life and in your business life, because it helps root that out and helps you show up a little bit differently.
Excellent. Thank you both for the recommendations. Harnum, I'll be adding that to my summer reading list. I guess it'll be on point as I'm prepping for Ironman, which definitely has a lot of that fear component into it. So I look forward to it. Thank you both for joining this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you're joining us globally. I appreciate the rich discussion, and Michael and Harnum, thanks for Michael and You Mon, thanks for your time.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Michael. Thank
everybody.
you, Mel.
See you, Mel.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Yaman.
Bye.